Hello everyone, this is Christopher Main, programmer for VerticalThird. In this video, we're going to explore the action singles available in VerticalThird. To follow along, you can open the level example display map. This is the second video for the VerticalThird combat system. I suggest watching the action system documentation in the correct order. All documentation videos are linked in the description. Right away, we will click the three dots by the play button. Verify new editor window is checked, and click Advanced Settings. Let's make sure Always on Top is checked. Now we can close this window. The next step is turn on the debug component for action spawns. This will allow us later in the video to perfectly match the hit radius with the spell effect. Click on the VerticalThird folder and search Component, Action, Spawner. Double click on the Scene Component _ Action. In the search field in the top left, we're going to type in debug. Once we click on it, we should see the options in the details panel to the right. Sometimes this glitches and you'll have to click on the main grid in order to refresh it. This is where we'll click the drop down menu and choose for duration. This will set the hit trace to last for 5 seconds. Now we can hit compile and save. Then we can close this window. I'm going to go to the window option at the top and go to Content Browser and make sure there is one open on the bottom. In the previous video, we created a database new game folder and created an action test and kit test data table. If you double click to open the kit test, you can see that the action test is in the second slot. This is for the left click. We can close the kit window once we verify our action test is there. Now we will double click on Action Test and slide it to the right. Now we will click play and head to the combat testing area through the teleporter. Once you click play, you can hit the Windows key or the middle mouse button to unlock the mouse. I'm resizing and repositioning my window to fit above the content browser. Now we can walk to the teleporter and click on Combat Testing. First thing we'll do is walk over to the actor spawner and type in target dummy and scroll down to the base target dummy and click spawn. Now we can walk to the left to close the window. Search for a test in the action tool. Click on Kit Test and click Load. We can click the checkbox as well to auto load. We will start fresh here and clear the statistic chain. Then we'll add a new one. We're going to add a basic damage just so we know we are actually hitting our target. Note that we go over the statistic change options in the previous video. Let's click Set in Combat. For timing, we're going to set to Instant. For Aura, we'll set to Negative. Targets, we'll set to Enemy. We'll leave the element to Unavoidable. For Math, we'll click Subtract for damage. For the statistic, we will choose Health Current. And we'll set a value of 250 with a variance of 50. We can leave power scaling to 1, and we do not need the tick or duration. All of the other options for this use case, we can just leave as default. And then we can collapse the statistic change category. We will start fresh from the action collections as well, so let's click the trash can to clear, click the plus line to add a new one, and expand the different rows. Note that VerticalThird has a unique action chain system, which is also described in the previous video. In the setup category, we have the action type. In VerticalThird, there are several action singles that you can spawn. Direct target, projectile, beam, cone, mobility, AoE or area effect, and actor spawn. Once the action cast is finished, you can set it a slight delay before the ability spawns. On the first action to spawn, this can help synchronize it with your animation. On every other action to spawn, it will be a design decision. There is also the next set option, which is part of the action chain system and is described in the previous video. And finally, the statistic change ID, which is also gone over in the previous video. The next category is the hitbox. In many cases, this sets the hit radius of your action. For example, the size of the projectile or the size of the area effect. In the appearance section, this is where you set your visual effects. You can change the size of the visual effects here as well. The next category is audio. And there are two types of sound effects you can add. The first one is an initial sound effect. When the cast is complete, the sound effects will play. Keep in mind this is an additional parameter. In many cases, it is still best to have these sound effects in your animation montage. The next one is an ambient sound effect, which can be used as the sound of a burning fire or a low rumble of a projectile passing by. Now we are on to the telegraph category. For the telegraph, you can change how the location is positioned. You can change the scale and the decal material used for this telegraph. Keep in mind that for this telegraph to be enabled, you need to scroll up and go to the telegraph category at the very top and click Enable. On to the lifetime category. The lifetime is how long this action will stay alive before self-destructing. You can choose to move on to the next action set or part of the chain system when this lifetime ends. To showcase many of the categories we just went over, we will start with the AoE or area effect action type. Let's set that up now. The first option we'll change is the visual effect. For the Niagara system in appearance, let's search for explosion. We can choose the top one on the list. We can leave the scale down to 111. For hitbox extent, we'll change it to 250, 250, 250. And in setup, we'll change the type to AoE. You can also set the initial audio to explosion soft. For this example, we won't need ambient, so we'll just leave this blank. Let's take a quick look at our progress. When we left click, we'll use our action. Right off the bat, you can see some inconsistencies with this action. The first one we will fix is the animation and action spawn timing. Currently, when the cast time ends, the action is spawned immediately, but the character's arm is not fully extended yet, so it just looks a little bit off. Let's add a 0.5 second delay on the action spawn. Now when the character's arm is fully extended, the explosion goes off. The red and green lines are the debug trace that we turned on earlier. For a target to be hit, they have to be within these lines. You'll notice that the spell effect itself is going far beyond these lines. I'm sure you have your own experiences when playing games where the visual elements to an action do not line up with the actual hit trace. In many cases, this can be an extremely important factor to what is considered a high polish or quality to the feel of a game. Let's start by reducing the visual effect size. Let's put it to 0.1 all the way across. This time the effect was very tiny. Let's bump that back up to 0.5 across. Now you can see that the visual effect is coming perfectly in line with the hit trace. We can also do the opposite approach. Let's set our hit trace to 1000 in each box. Then we'll set our VFX to 1 in each box. The visual effect is clearly too small for this. So now let's double it. Let's go to 2 on each side of the VFX. Now we're matching up more tightly. You can fix many of your issues just through this system, but sometimes it'll require actually editing the VFX itself. I've designed these VFX to have a size of 1 and a hitbox extent of 500. Now we're going to start on telegraphs. If we scroll all the way up to the top and expand telegraph, we'll make sure it's checked. Now we can scroll down and play with the telegraph options. We'll start by setting the scale setting to centered. We'll leave the scale offset to 1 for now. And in the material window, we'll search for telegraph. And we'll choose this circle version. We'll click the reload button on our action tool, and then we'll try it out. Right away, you can see we have a telegraph spawning. In the majority of cases, telegraphs are used as a visual aid for players to portray the hit radius of an AoE. This is why the VerticalThird system will automatically size the telegraph to the hitbox of the AoE. So by default, this telegraph will have a size of 500, just like the AoE hitbox size. The scale offset allows us to add to that size. So if we set the scale offset to 100 in each box, the telegraph will have a size of 600, while the actual AoE will have a size of 500. If we set the size to 500, we can see the dramatic difference. In many cases, making the telegraph slightly larger is a better gameplay experience for players. The scale setting changes the position of the telegraph. The main use case here is for any type of action that will be shot forward from the character. This can be a projectile, a beam, or to signal a raid boss is about to charge. The forward option is best used with the square telegraph. Changing the scale, I can set the X value to reveal a potentially dangerous path ahead. Now obviously for this specific ability with area effect, it's not very relevant, but with a projectile or dash ability, it would be more relevant. For now, we're going to turn telegraphs off. Let's scroll up to the top and uncheck the box. Scroll back down. One extra note about lifetime is that the system will do its own calculation to add to this. So if you have a volume-based AoE with a duration, that value will be added as well. The targeting, location, and rotation are all involved with how the action is spawned into the world. We'll go over a few options, then showcase some examples. Targeting is how the player gives input or selects a target. The first option is self. For this option, no matter what the player has targeted, whether it's ally or enemy, this action will always be targeting yourself. The next one is aim, which is for first person or third person shooters. The next is direction, which is a standard location and rotation. Target actor uses the targeting system, which is the red outline targets for enemy and green outline targets for allies. Aim-based targeting is also for the first person or third person perspectives, and we will get into that shortly. Aim prediction will detect your target's velocity and shoot a projectile in its direction while predicting where the target will be. This is typically used for AI. Nearby enemy and nearby ally are exactly what it says. It will search for a nearby character and set it as the target. Mouse is for isometric and top-down games. It will detect the world position of the mouse in the game. Eligible targets are how to filter what gets hit. For example, if we set it to self, even if I have enemies and allies within the hit radius, the action will only hit my character. There are multiple options to choose from yourself, allies, enemies, or everything. As mentioned in the last video, if you choose to hit everything, you can still change filters and eligible targets at the statistic change level. So I could choose to hit everything, but have specific statistic changes only heal certain characters or damage other characters. The nearby range applies to the nearby enemy and ally option. This sets the maximum range to scan for other characters. Aim prediction also applies to the aim prediction value. A value of 1 is precise aim on where a target is heading with their velocity. Lower than 1 will undershoot the prediction, and higher than 1 will overshoot the prediction. The location and rotation apply to where this action is initially spawned and which way it is facing. Note that many of these options may require a target, which is enabled in the target options at the top. If you scroll up and go to targeting and choose the drop-down menu for required targets, there are options for enemy, ally, and location. Let's scroll back down and we'll go over some of these options. The first option we'll go over is Target Actor. As mentioned, this is going to require us to scroll up, go to the targeting section, and set required targets to enemy. Now we can scroll back down. The current location setting is set to Action Owner Current. This means it'll spawn the action directly where the owner is. If we change this to Target Actor Current, the action will now spawn directly on our enemy target. The offset allows us to move the location based on the target. If we put this setting back to Action Owner Current, we can test this ability just to see where it's at. On the X value, I'm going to set it to 500. We can try the ability again, and you can see it's spawning 500 units forward. Same thing goes for the Y-axis, and it'll spawn 500 units to the right. Same thing for the Z factor, and it'll spawn 500 units above the character. We can set this back to 0 for now. Now we can go ahead and set this to location target. For the targeting method, we'll set it to direction, and we will scroll up and set the required target to location. Quick reminder that if you change a required target, you will need to make sure your kit is reloaded. Once it is reloaded and we click our button, you'll see that we have a target helper. This is how we choose a location target. While a location target is active, if we click the button again, it will spawn at that location. There are several visual elements we can change with the target helper. By default, it is set to a decal, which is the ring you see on the ground, and we can change the scale of it. And you can also change it to a static mesh. The default static mesh I have available are just basic spheres and cubes. This is where you can get creative with some art assets and make a unique look for your target helper. Another thing to notice is that currently the target helper will never lift off the ground. This is also a setting if we scroll up to the target options at the top. Also note that the range in this targeting category is how far the action will be able to go, distance-wise. If we change the limitations to ground and air, and here I forgot to make sure the action kit was reloaded, so we will make sure we do that. Now the target helper will actually lift off the ground, and you can activate an ability in the air. For now, we'll just set this back to ground. For now, we're going to set the required target to none, and the location back to Action Owner Current. Now we're going to test some of these options with a projectile. Let's scroll up and set the type to projectile. We can expand the projectile options and make sure it is set to normal and the speed is 5,000. The rest of these options can be left to default. We also have to change the visual effects. So let's open up that and search for projectile system. And we can choose the one that says Niagara system _ projectile _ system. When we test this out, we can see that the visual effect is very small. So let's increase it to 333. We can also see that our damage is not applying. So let's go to the targeting section and we're going to change the eligible targets to enemies. This will allow us to now hit the target and damage will show. Now we'll just do a few examples of the rotation setting. If we click our projectile, we see that it shoots forward. If we set the Z rotation to 90, it'll shoot to the right. Setting the Y to 45 degrees, we'll shoot it up and to the right. And put the Y down to 0 again. And if we set this to 180, it'll shoot behind us. We can set that back to 0. Now the X value for the rotation is pivoting around its forward direction. So you won't see much change in the projectile unless there's a noticeable visual effect element that might twist it. For next step, we're going to close that action tool and hit escape. And we're going to go down to gameplay and choose the first person shooter option. So now we can see we're in a first person shooter mode. So there's no extra set of arms or guns, and you can look down and you'll be able to see your feet. If we release the mouse, we can set our targeting method to aim. This is now going to use the middle of our screen as a location to spawn the projectile. Now here I'm noticing a few inconsistencies with our projectile. You can see it kind of disappears a little early. This is because we have the hitbox set to what would be an area effect. So it's very large for a projectile. So let's put this down to 50 across the board. Varying so early, and it's kind of hitting on point and where we expect to hit. We can do the same thing with third person shooter. So we can again go to hit escape, hit game options, and go to third person shooter. And now we're in the third person form and still using the aim functionality. Now we're going to try the nearby target. So we can go to target method and select nearby enemy. And in this case, we'll set the nearby range to 1500, just as an example. And now you can see I'm not facing the target or aiming at him, and it's going to shoot straight at him. You can see that this big wide hit trace around here is the 1500 range that we typed in, and that's the area in which it's going to look for targets. This same method can be applied with nearby ally. Now we'll get our action tool back, which we can just run to the edge of the square and run back in. Research for a test, and we'll click the kit_test, Click the checkbox, hit load. Now we will set the required target to enemy. And set our target method to aim prediction. We'll set the aim prediction to 1.1. Now we're going to take a little walk over to the teleporter and head to the action kit section. This has some moving targets, which we can use to showcase as an example. Now you can see as the character runs, it's trying to predict where it's going to be. And so in this case, it stopped early, right as it was being shot off. And so you can tell it was trying to predict right where it was going to be at the right moment in time. These next moments, it's hitting as the character's running, so it's always going to land. The distance between the characters and how fast the projectile is will really give a difference in feel of how almost impossible it is to avoid something based on your velocity. That's good enough for here, so we're going to run back to teleporter, click on combat testing, jump back on the platform, and we're going to respawn a target dummy, and then type test back into the action tool and make sure our checkbox is checked, and we are loading our action test. Just to reset, our target method will go back to direction, and we will remove the target requirement and set it to none. Now we'll set up an action chain for this. We will collapse our projectile and then click on the plus sign to add another one. We will set this up as a AoE, just like we did before. Set the type to AoE. Just as an example, I'm going to set the statistic change ID to -1, which essentially means this action will not make any statistic changes. Now I'll change the hitbox to 500 across. I'll set the Niagara system to explosion. I can keep the scale at 1. This time around, I'm just going to ignore audio and telegraph. I'll expand targeting, and we'll set this to direction. Set the eligible targets to enemy and the location to impact. I can double check the AoE settings to just be standard, and the rest can be ignored. Now I can scroll up to the chain limit and increase it to 1. This is essentially saying that the first action set is the projectile, and it can spawn 1 additional action set once the first projectile hits something. I will expand the projectile action set, and we will make sure the next set is set to 1. As a side note, you can set the next set to -1, and for that specific ability to not spawn any further actions. And now you see here when the projectile shoots off and it hits its target, the AoE is spawned directly at that impact location where that projectile hit. We can scroll down, and if we don't want to spawn right where it hits, we can also set what target it hit. In this case, because the actor is small, it doesn't make much difference. If you had a very large enemy, it would actually be a pretty wider difference based on where the actual projectile hit and just spawning from the actual character itself. And we can showcase some of the directional and rotational changes you can make to spice things up. Let's expand the location and rotation. We can set the X value in location to 1500. And now the Z value to 1500 as well. So now this is based on the action owner current position, it will spawn the projectile 1500 units in front of us and 1500 units above us. And you can see it's flying high, way up there. Now if we set the rotation to 90 degrees, this is going to, instead of shooting forward, it's going to shoot it upwards, which is obviously not exactly what we want. We wanted to shoot it downwards. So let's set it to negative 90 degrees, and now it's going to collide into the ground. So it gives you a lot of options to play with, where these things spawn from, which direction they come from, and how these projectiles can work. Let's reset all this back to 0. I'm going to show you a little bit of a difference between Action Owner Current and Action Owner Cast Start. On Action Owner Cast Start, the action will spawn where the cast began. You'll see that if I start casting and walk a little bit, the projectile will still spawn where I started casting. This can be really useful for telegraph actions, where an enemy starts a cast but might still be rotating or moving towards its current target. Even if they're moving or rotating, the action will still spawn where the telegraph was placed. If I set this back to Action Owner Current, it will always spawn directly where the character currently is. I'm going to reset some of our settings before we move on. Let's scroll up and change the chain limit to 0. For now, I'm going to collapse the index 1, which is the area effect ability. I will close the action tool, hit escape, go to gameplay options, and change back to third person. Then to get the action tool back, we will run off to the corner of the platform and run back in. I will type test back in, and then click on kit test, load, and click the checkbox. Now we will take a further look at some of the options for each action single. I'm going to make sure that targeting is set to direction, location set to Action Owner Current. The first action single is a direct target. Direct targets does not have any additional parameters. It is specifically used to make direct statistic changes based on a target. So this can be a direct heal or a direct damage, casting heal over time on a target, damage over time on a target, that type of thing. Let's set this back to projectile. Let's take a look at the base projectile. We can change the speed of the projectile right away. We can set it to be really slow. Maybe that's a little too slow. Let's make it a little faster. Now, once a projectile starts going above the 5,000 or 6,000 speed, that is when, in my experience, you start to have inconsistencies with hit. And the technical reason for that is it's moving so fast. When it's moving frame by frame, it's literally one frame it'll be in one position, the next frame it'll already be behind the target. And so for these type of situations, I have created a checkbox that is enhanced hit detection. Now this will run a trace from the last frame to the current frame, and if it hits something in between, it will be aware of it. This does add a performance hit to your projectile, so make sure you're profiling and monitoring your performance if you turn this on for everything in your game, or if it's just a couple, it probably won't matter. To showcase some of the piercing options available and some of the other features, we're going to spawn some more actors. We'll walk over to the spawn actor and search target dummy. This time we're going to change their location and spawn an actor in every location except the first one. This type of spawn system really lets you play with your encounter design. It can be for a pack of enemies or a single enemy or a boss. The system works in a packaged game, so you can design a bunch of actions package the game, and iterate in a multiplayer session with other designers or QA. I previously went over this, but this yellow beam shows what the action tool has targeted. You can change your target with the drop-down menu. This will update the beam and you'll be able to see what you're targeting. You can modify the statistics of an enemy and reload their actions. This top section allows you to modify statistics. You can add them and remove them. When reloading AI actions, make sure it is an AI action kit, as they are different from players. Just to recap where we're at, we have a normal projectile set up, and if we click, it will just shoot forward and hit the first target. We'll slow down the projectile a little bit, just so we can see this a little clearer. Here we're going to go over the piercing projectile. Go down the projectile category and set it to piercing. A piercing projectile uses the multi-hit feature or category. Setting the number of hits to 0 will be unlimited pierces. Setting it to 1 will only hit 1 target. Setting it to 2 will hit 2 targets, and etc. You can also change the next set functionality. This again is part of the chain system gone in the last video. In this example earlier, we had an AoE explosion as the next set, and we can have different AoE explosions based on which hit and which pierce this was. For the rest of the actions, I'm going to showcase how quick and easy it is to modify, create, or compare data tables in VerticalThird. Click on the database folder. Let's search for Projectile Homing. We can open the action_projectile_homing. We can right click on the top new row and click copy. Click back to our action test data table. Right click on the new row and click paste. Now our homing projectile has been set up. Now you have a base or foundation of an action to modify and extend, or just tinker with the settings. This homing projectile is more set up for a fighter jet type missile, and if we change our rotation slightly, you'll see it slowly curves towards its target. We can change this to more of a MMO projectile, where it's going to always hit its target. This will constantly make the rotation directly focused to its target. You'll be able to see it snap towards its target here. That is done through the force hit option here. There are several different options you can choose from, and you can open up the data tables below, copy them, paste them into your main action, and experiment with the differences and compare them. We can do the same thing for beam actions. Let's search for forward beam. We can open it up and right click to click copy, go back to our main action, and right click to do paste. Always remember to click reload, or it may not be fully reloaded just yet. And in this case, I have a beam set to hold mouse button down, so I will click that off. Reload the action again, and we'll be able to see that when we click the button, it starts shooting our beam. Then we'll be able to scroll down to beam options and go to forward beam, and then we can take a look at the settings to modify. For instance, we can click piercing and maybe make the range 3,500. And you can see it's been updated. You can swap out different spell effects, change their size. You can limit the hits per second So right now it sets for 2, so it will hit 2 times per second. We can set this to 4 and it'll hit 4 times a second. Damage is going crazy. Set it down to 0.5 for 1 damage every 2 seconds, or 0.25 for 1 damage every 4 seconds. So we'll only really get 2 damage ticks out of that with a 5-second cast. We can do the same thing for cone. We can search the database for cone, and we will open up action_cone. Sometimes windows will pop over the place. You'll just have to drag them out and pop them into the right window. We can reposition our main window from there. Again, just right click to copy and right click to paste on our main action we're testing with. Make sure we click load to double check it's loaded. And now we're casting a cone effect. There's a lot of hit traces going off with cone here, and that's why you're seeing so many lines pop up everywhere. There are the different traces of the cone, plus some area effect traces going off. Now we can search for mobility sprint. And we can copy this and paste it to our action test we're working with. Once again, reload it, and then voila, we got a sprint. Now we can search for a sky slam. This one requires a ground target. Copy and paste. Then we can reload our action, and we can choose a location and ground slam. Let's pull up the sky slam that has a pause in it. Once again, copy the new row and paste it. And there is our fly up in the air and slam to the ground action. Next one is a dash ability. So we can search mobility dash. Double click on action_mobility_dash. You can copy and paste that into our main action. And as a quick note, you can right click on a tab and choose close everything on the right. And now we have our dash ability. The next point I want to make as well is that you can actually create data tables while in Play in Editor. So we can right click on our action test and click duplicate, rename the file to something new, open up our kit test, and drag and drop it into a new slot. In this case, it's right click. And just as an example, I'm going to search the Sky Slam ability again. I will open that up and copy the row. Go back to my new game folder, open up the new data table, right click on the new row and click paste, and reload my action kit. Now I can right click and you'll see my new action is there. The action system is one of the prime examples of why we call VerticalThird an iteration engine. The system is very open to change and very quick change. It is extremely friendly to designers not having to code a single thing to add a lot of content to your game. This concludes our exploration on VerticalThird action singles. There will be more videos in the future exploring the action system. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us through one of our social media channels or on our Discord server.